Okay. All right. Well, first off, I want to thank Sadia for alluding to my childlike demeanor here. So, why is this not? One moment. Not quite there yet. Yay. Okay. All right. So, this is joint work with my colleague Aaron Jaggard, who did most of the heavy lifting. We're going to tell you about Tor adversaries who don't miss the mark. The main takeaway I want you to get from this is that adversaries in existing Tor research and, in fact, design have, I would say, to a large extent, overlooked goals and strategies of what I would consider very realistic adversaries for the primary set of Tor users. And because of this, we've significantly misevaluated and misconstrued risk. And I'll give some examples in here. And the point is that going forward, we need to be considering adversaries who are targeting things. So the traditional Tor adversary we look at is an end-to-end correlating adversary who can look at the patterns of bits at both sides, or if you're looking at fingerprinting, the pattern of bits on one side, and thereby de-anonymize. And this is the main thing we often look at. And so if you're looking at it on the relay level, that means you're looking at the guard nodes and the exit nodes primarily. All of this research, I would say, well, not all, but for the most part, it takes what I would call a hoovering strategy. The most successful adversary is the one who compromises the most circuits, the largest fraction of traffic. That's the biggest win, and that's what we worry about. Now, for most users, that's maybe not a bad approximation, but the truth is, for most users, Tor is slightly overkill. The list at the top here is off of the Tor project homepage. These are the kinds of users that Tor is supposed to protect against. And this is, in fact, the kinds of users for whom we designed and invented onion routing. But these people are not just facing hoovering adversaries. They may have quite serious nation states or large criminal organizations that they're up against. And they're not just looking out for whatever. They may be interested in you. Hey, this guy's doing something. I want to figure out what's going on here. We heard about from, was it Bill Marzak's talk on Monday? He was talking about targeting things where they'll send threatening stories about your daughter's injuries and stuff. So the question is, if we're looking at Tor, what are some examples of targeted users then, and what would targeting attacks against them look like? So in this talk, I'm going to give you a couple of examples. First, of a Cabal meeting on a private IRC channel, and then the attacks will be attempting to learn about that. I'll also compare this to some work on looking at IRC users using a more hoovering strategy. And then next, I'm going to give an example of targeting the users of a particular onion site. So trying to learn about how popular it is and learn about the distribution of usage and users. And then I'm going to finish up with some countermeasures. Now, there's a lot more details on this in an archive paper that we have out there you can go look for. But we also, in that talk about, we present an abstract model of targeting adversaries in general, and we also look at some other kinds of examples. So starting with the Cabal example, we assume we have a group that's meeting regularly on some private IRC channel. The adversary doesn't have access to the server. All the Cabal members are assumed to be going over Tor, and we assume they make a new circuit every time the Cabal meets. So what might the adversary try to do here? Well, first off, they might just want to know how big is this Cabal. They heard about it somehow exogenously. Is this just a couple of yahoos, or is this some big group of people that I really need to worry about? And then once they have that, maybe they want to find who are the most important users, or where are they located? Where do I have to direct my further attacks? So I want to understand the distribution of them. And then I might actually try to go and find the IP addresses of either the most interesting users or all of them. Those are just some examples. But again, the main idea I want is to get people to start thinking in targeting terms, not necessarily just the specific examples that I'm coming up with here. So unlike the usual strategy of focusing on the ends, which is what happens in hoovering, in the example of targeting attack that we looked at, first step would be to try to compromise as many middle relays as you have bandwidth for, say. And then once you do that, every time the Cabal meets, well, if a circuit's going to go through you, now you can see the guard, because you're the middle, of, say, a Cabal member. So now you've identified that guard, and then you just watch over meetings over time, and you'll just get this list of guards. And then if you choose, then you can go and, if you decide to do so, try to bridge or compromise the relevant guards. Now, this, of course, depends on some assumptions. Well, we're making some assumptions. One is that the compromised middle relays that you own roughly proportional to the fraction of middle relay bandwidth you own. We assume that you're also targeting some relevant Cabal. You already know about them for some reason. This might be for a couple of different reasons. Maybe you already own one of the Cabal members, in which case you already know the number of people there. That you've already won that part. But you don't know where they are, where their guards are and stuff, and you will know things about how active different parties are. But maybe you don't even have that. Maybe you heard about it somewhere, but you have realized you have one of the Cabal members, but you don't actually have access to his computer. You just have access to, say, his ISP or his guard. Now, we also assume, and let me know if this doesn't answer your question yet, that when you're meeting on a Cabal, if you've already got one party you're looking at, then anywhere else, meeting's going to be long and varied enough IRC traffic such that you're going to recognize it anywhere else. And then you're going to be able to see these middle relays and identify the relevant guards. So lots of graphs we have. I'm just going to give you a couple. So suppose you want to try to make sure that you've compromised at least one guard for every Cabal member. So this represents the expected fraction of Cabal members with at least one guard identified over time, over numbers of meetings. I'm going to focus on the 20% relay for purposes partly of time, but also 20% adversary. Meaning he owns 20% of middle relay bandwidth. For the kinds of adversaries we're talking about, that's a couple tens of thousands of dollars at most. This is basically nothing. If you get the approval to do it, that's like zero. Another thing you might want to do is figure out how good is your estimate of Cabal size. And we didn't have enough power to do this over many, many meetings. But if you look at the 20% adversary, you can see that already at, after, say, 10 meetings or so, they're getting a pretty good, the distribution is this way. You're getting a pretty good idea about size. And if we had the computing power to do this for like 20 meetings, I think it would be even better. So you've identified all these guards. Now you want to go bridge some of them. We considered a 50% probability of bridging and a 90%. Now, I think that 90% is actually very realistic. You might think that's crazy. Oh, well, let me point out that at 90%, if you own 20% of the middle relays, then you have, like 85% chance of having discovered the guard of the guy who's, say, talking the most and compromising them. Now, why do I say 90% is realistic? Well, first of all, the adversary is going to try a bunch of things. Maybe they can go directly to the ISP of that guard. Maybe they can run a 0-day against that guard. If nothing else, they probably have access to an AS. And in the Raptor paper, we know that 90% of all Tor relays are subject to pretty easy to mount BGP hijacks, which would then basically do the job. So I think this is entirely realistic. So let me do a comparison between the targeting approach and the hoovering strategy. We actually looked at IRC user as a use class in a paper a couple years ago. I did with Aaron Johnson, a bunch of other people. I'm not going to state the parameters, but in the parameters, the numbers that we had in that paper, roughly it would take for a Cabal of 10 to 20 users, in the Cabal, it would take 150 to 200 days to identify most of the members. Whereas using the targeting strategy for the same pattern of connecting, it would be on the order of 4 or 5 days. And by that time, you have a good idea of Cabal size. You would most likely have identified the leader's guard and be able to then go and compromise. Now, I would say this is actually a bit conservative, because when you are going to spin up relays and start doing an attack, if you spin up middle relays, you start to get traffic after just a day, whereas if you're going to spin up guards, it takes on the order of a week to start getting traffic. So if anything, this is conservative. But most importantly, if we're talking about a realistic adversary, you know, if you have an adversary who's going to say, like, okay, so I'm going to just run up a bunch of relays, and then I'm going to watch the network for, I don't know, a couple of months, and we'll see what happens. If you go and you try to get approval for that, or if you decide you want to do that yourself because you actually want to attack things, that's not realistic. But if you say, like, I can spin this up, I can do this for a couple of days, I'm going to start to get an idea, how much am I seeing? Oh, maybe I should spin up some more relays. Maybe I should do this. Oh, now I'm going to go and look at the guards. Well, how about if I can just, oh, I don't have access to that ISP. Do I want to spend a 0 day on them? Can I do the BGP hijack? So they're going to have all these decision points as they're going along. So I think a realistic adversary has a much better chance here. Okay, next thing I want to talk about is, suppose you want to target an onion site. This is going to focus on the client side, just like the Cabal meetings, except that users aren't all meeting at it simultaneously. One thing I want to note is that all the different things we've done to try to counter estimates of you know, measuring onion sites and hiding them and stuff doesn't do anything against any of this. Now, before I can explain this, I have to take a little diversion into some population ecology stuff. So suppose you have a lake full of fish of some species, and you want to be able to figure out how many fish are in the lake. So what you can do is you can go and you can catch some fish, and then you can tag them. And that's great. Now you have some fraction of fish, but you don't know how many fish you've got. So what you can do is you let them swim around a little bit such that they're, you know, hopefully representatively distributed, and now you capture a bunch a second time, and the proportion of tagged fish to the numbers you catch the second time is the same as the proportion of the number you catch the first time to the entire population, and thereby you can figure out the entire population. So that's great. Why the hell am I talking about fish? Well, it's because if you take n to be the number of users, the capital N, visiting more than m times per day. And I say more than m times per day because somebody might happen upon that accidentally, or increasingly there's entities who are out there crawling as much of onion space as they can get. And so they're going to be hitting it maybe a couple of times a day. You don't really care about them. You don't want to count them. But maybe you want to find the people who are going there often. So you let n be the number of users visiting more than m times per day. And then the first capture will be the number of guards seen originating more than m connections per day to the targeted onion site. And then you run the experiment again later, and k will be the number of guards in the second time seen visiting more than m times per day. And the tagged guards effectively are the ones that you saw both times. So you can use these techniques and to get an idea. Now, an important assumption here is that website fingerprinting from middle relays is effective. I think this should be straightforwardly obvious. Fortunately, there was some research that was presented at Oakland recently that showed that 99.98% accuracy of this kind of thing. So I think that assumption is well grounded. So we did some experiments and looked at basically, suppose you had roughly a normal-sized Tor network, and then you had two types of clients, those who might, say, go to a site just twice a day, and those who would go to a site, say, 10 times a day. And how well does the adversary do in estimating the number of interesting users? And you can see, if you look again at the 20% adversary, that the median here is pretty close to the 25. So they have a pretty good idea, and this part represents the distribution. So this is, again, I think reasonably effective at finding onion site users. Now, so what could you do against this? One thing is layered guards. This is something we've looked at for other reasons, but we haven't really seriously considered doing this on the client side entirely. That will make it hard to identify the guards of individuals. It's not, I might point out, going to do anything against hiding the information about the popularity of a given onion site, as long as there's any part of the circuit which is chosen on a per circuit basis. So like if the rendezvous point is chosen randomly each time, you're still going to be able to do a version of this. Something else you might do is randomized selection of guard set size and duration. The less you can predict from seeing a guard, the more that might help. Something I really want to follow up and experiment on, though I have not yet convinced my colleagues this is a good idea, is to create standardized traffic templates for onion services so that you're not going to hide the fact that this is an onion service, but now you're going to have all the onion services. If you can have a handful of traffic templates, and since this could be standardized, they could even communicate with this to the client, who will then also engage in the standardized behavior, and now they're all going to look kind of the same. Stuff that I have not yet looked at in this work, network links. I've only looked at the relays. I haven't done anything with dynamics of the relays, of the internet routing going on, or of the client's behavior. And I haven't looked at, so far we've only looked at examples where you say, okay, here's a destination or a group, and we want to find out about that group at the destination side. What we haven't looked at specifically is examples where you say, okay, this guy seems interesting. What can I find out about where he's going? So that's it. Hit me with your best shot. Fire away.